This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
Predicting the result of the next election is going to be tricky to get it exactly right, because there's going to be so many seats which are marginal. At the last general election, we had more marginal seats than ever before. And the next, or at least more than anything in the last 73 years. And the next election, we might see even more marginal seats. So there's going to be very close in many places.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast. In the week, voters went to the polls to decide who will take control of County Hall, for what time KCC has left before being abolished. Our reporter was in the thick of the disorder in Dover, and Labour finally decided to let two suspended councillors back into the party. I'm Simon Finlay, local democracy reporter covering Kent County Council, and I'm joined by Robert Boddy, who reports on Medway.
Hello.
And Dan Essen, who reports on the Borough and District Councils.
Hello.
And Nikki White, who's been looking at what's happening at Westminster.
Hello.
Right, we're recording this episode ahead of the local election counts, and we'll be hearing how polling chief Martin Baxter thinks things might pan out. But for the very latest on the results, don't forget to visit Kent Online. First up, Robert, what's been going on in Medway this week?
So I've got two stories which cropped up from the latest full council meeting in Medway. The first is that 14 months after two Labour members were suspended from their party while an investigation into an alleged incident at Medway Labour Christmas party are now back in the group. Councillors Stephen Hubbard and Satinder Shokar rejoined their former colleagues after sitting as independents for the duration of the investigation with little fanfare at all.
And what was the finding of the investigation, Rob?
Well, that's the thing, we don't know. Apart from the fact that the two councillors are back, the Labour Party only said the investigation was concluded. Locally, Labour and Medway Council leader Vince Maple said he'd been very frustrated that it had taken so long. Now, my second bit of news is that a motion asking for officers to consider keeping Chatham docks as employment land in the upcoming local plan was voted down over legal concerns which were first raised in January.
So what are the legal concerns here?
When this was first raised in January, officers said the motion could raise the risk of legal challenges on the basis that councillors would be deciding elements of the local plan before the proper consultation was conducted. It was deferred while outside legal advice was sought, and it agreed with the officers' original assessment, but said that voting down the motion would not be considered predetermination, which was a concern previously. And so this was the recommendation of officers. Labour voted it down, the Tories abstained, and the independent group who tabled the motion, Reform UK, and independent councillor Chris Spalding voted for. Councillor Elizabeth Turpin from the independent group said she just wanted to discuss the option before the June meeting when the draft local plan would be put forward, because by that point it would be too late for major changes. But officers said June would be the proper time and place to discuss the local plan.
Thanks, Robert. Dan, what have you been up to?
So while others were resting up on the Sabbath just gone, I was actually out about in Dover covering the anti-immigration demonstration and counter-protest, which I told you about last week.
Yeah. You thought it was going to be a bit of a damp squib, but did it turn out that way?
For these demos, it actually got a pretty large turnout. It was organised by a biker group, and they were joined by many of the sort of habitual protester sorts who rove around at these things, and some big names on the extreme right, people like Steve Laws and Paul Golding of Britain First. Overall, there are about 500 people on the anti-immigration side and about 30 at maximum at the counter-protest, which they were clearly not too enthused about. Often the counter demonstrations are able to draw quite a lot of people, but not this time.
So how did they go? Was there much disorder?
It was a bit rowdy at points, but nothing crazy. So when the group of anti-immigration protesters first came down the high street and passed by the counter-protesters at the market square, there's quite a lot of abuse being thrown around, some colourful language. But later on, there was a much larger crowd of bikers and anti-immigration protesters returned to the square. By that point, the sort of left-wing counter-protesters dwindled to barely a handful of people. So they ended up surrounded by police on this platform in the market square, while having a variety of obscene things chanted at while people were sort of pushing and trying to get to them. Police has get in a couple of people's faces, push them around a bit to prevent any physical contact between the two sides, but there were no arrests or the like, or damage to property or anything.
All right, cheers, thank you.
So Simon, the polls have closed for the Kent County Council election. Any thoughts?
Well, I've really just been looking back on the campaign for the county council elections, and it's been a weird campaign because the presence of Reform UK has completely skewed the outcome of many of the divisions that are up for grabs. And as this goes out, the polls have closed and the counting will have started.
You prepared to stake your journalistic credibility on making any predictions?
No. It's completely impossible to call it. Funny enough, I was reading this morning, John Curtis, the pollster, was reflecting on in one of the national newspapers about the fragmentation of the vote across the country, and I think that's probably been happening here too.
We've had quite a few big names visit Kent this election cycle. Do party leaders make a difference, do you think?
Well, we've had Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has been to Kent twice, once to a logistics hub just outside Maidstone, and then to a farm near Sevenoaks. Reform leader Nigel Farage has been to the Kent twice as well, once to Hythe and then to Dover. And the first visit included a rally in front of about 800 or 900 people at Detling. Ed Davey, the leader of the Lib Dems, he's popped in to Tunbridge Wells as his deputy Daisy Cooper, who visited Sevenoaks. Carla Denyer of the Green Party, she went to Dartford to support a local candidate there. Do they make a difference? Well, maybe not. I mean, Farage works on the theory that if you get 900 activists in a hall, get them all fired up, they'll deliver much more leaflets. And he's a master of getting himself publicity. Carla Denyer of the Greens, she certainly presented herself as intelligent and likeable and articulate, and seemed a quite positive force. And people seem to like Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, and he backed the cause down in Tunbridge Wells, where the Dems are expected to do quite well. And Daisy Cooper, his deputy, came across really well as well. So having the leaders turning up shows that the party's taking the election seriously and adds a bit of glitter to the campaign.
I know there's not many Labour names on that list for visiting Kent.
No big guns have been to Kent. Sorry, no leaders anyway, or deputy leaders. A chap called Steve Reid went to Thanet to launch the government's Breakfast Club initiative, but that passed most people by. He's the Secretary of State for Environment, so it's odd that he covered an education issue at the heart of the Labour manifesto. But as we speak, we're in the final throes of the campaign. There's been no visit from Sir Keir or his deputy Angela Rayner, and I understand that there isn't going to be one either. This would suggest to me that he's either keeping out of the way as his brand is so weak, or that he might have the opposite effect to the desired effect, or he's got other things to do, like running the country. This is Kemi Badenoch's first big test, and the same is true for Sir Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage since the general election, and the stakes are high, and only the Reform UK party seem likely to emerge with smiles on their faces as things stand at the minute. One Conservative activist who knows what he's talking about said to me the other day that if it's going to be bad for the Tories, it's probably going to be worse for Labour. Make of that what you will. Right, Nikki, what's been keeping our MPs busy?
OK, well, MP Tristan Osborne has highlighted a problem which I'm really on board with, and that's a call for more to be done to crack down on boy racers. Mr Osborne is the Labour representative for Chatham and Aylesford, and he wants Tunbridge and Morling Council to take further action to enforce its borough-wide public space protection order on the A228, and that's the section that runs between Holborough Lakes and Snodland Town Centre. He's been hearing from people during his surgeries who live in the area who are repeatedly blighted by the sound of car engines revving and racing as boy racer drivers tear up and down that stretch of road. Now, the council has already taken some action against car meetups and antisocial behaviour by putting a PSPO in place, and that actually covers the whole borough. Then back in February, they teamed up with the police for a joint operation on the A228 between Snodland and Horling, and also down at the East Peckham bypass, where 15 vehicles were stopped and drivers facing fines of up to £100. But that doesn't seem to have stopped the problem. So we've now got Borough Councillor Paul Hitmott. He's come on board and he's taken up the cause. He said, although it doesn't happen every weekend, it is still going on. And it's been going on and off for about a year, with drivers racing up and down the A228, making what he described as a hell of a noise that can be heard right across the town. He's now tabled something called a councillor's call for action, and that's to get together all the parties involved and decide what extra measures can be taken. Now, Mr Osborne has backed that move, saying it's time for proper enforcement and that residents shouldn't have to suffer sleepless nights and fear walking the streets due to reckless drivers.
Nick, you said you're on board with the idea. Why is that? Something you've personal experience of?
Absolutely. I don't live very far from the A228 in this particular stretch of road, and I can hear the cars racing up and down at night. Now, during the winter months when you're indoors and the windows are closed, it's annoying, but where I am, and that's about a mile away, I can block it out. But if this continues into the summer, when windows are going to be opened up again. I'm expecting a few sleepless nights ahead. I've also innocently been caught up in one of these things, and it's terrifying. We were driving home late one night and came off the roundabout near Peters Bridge to be faced with a swarm of people watching from the roadside. And then we had about 3 cars shoot past us at a horrific speed. It was genuinely frightening. I was terrified we were just going to get caught up in some sort of crash. Now, if you want to race your car, go to a track. I've got no problem with that. But, just don't involve innocent people like us. Now, the sooner this problem can be dealt with, the better as far as I'm concerned. So I, for one, am going to be keeping a close eye on what happens next.
OK, thank you.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Most politicians and political journalists are avid poll watchers, and for many a year now, the pollster to watch has been Electoral Calculus. Its founder, Martin Baxter, has been a guest on this podcast numerous times before. And as we entered the final stages of the election to Kent County Council, he was here again to talk about the volatility of the electorate and why this election is so hard to predict. Welcome, Martin.
Hello, Simon. Great to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Just before we start, we have to say that at the time of recording, we don't yet know who will be in charge of Kent County Council, but we do know that most local observers think it will be a hung council. In 2021, the Conservatives scooped more than 60% of the 80-plus seats at County Hall, with the other parties winning just a handful each. With the rise of the Reform Party, the national unpopularity of the Conservatives and the gradual surge of the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, that position seems likely to change dramatically. Martin, just firstly, can you put your finger on why things have changed so dramatically in the last 4 years?
Well, one way to think about it, of course, is just to cast your mind back all of 4 years ago to 2021, when Britain was a different place and Kent was a different place. The Prime Minister was Boris Johnson. We were still getting over COVID, and the Conservatives were very popular because partly because of the COVID emergency.
Yeah, the vaccine bounce, they called it, yeah.
Yes. So that how things have, they say a week is a long time in politics. 4 years is a very long time because things have changed a lot since then. We've been through several leaders of the Conservative Party since then. None of them achieving the popularity that Boris Johnson had. And so the Conservatives at the moment are still unpopular after their 14 years in government and have not yet really turned around under Kemi Beanock yet. On the other hand, the other traditional large party, Labour, although they did well at the general election, have not been having such a great time since then, that their poll ratings have been sliding and sliding. And as you mentioned, the main beneficiary of all this has been Reform. That Nigel Farage's party is ahead in the polls at the moment. On the national polls, they're ahead of Labour and the Conservatives. And so they are looking to take seats in counties across England, including Kent. But of course, that's our speculation at the moment because we don't have the advantage of knowing the actual results. Whether Reform have enough organisation on the ground, enough people tramping on streets, knocking on doorbells and speaking to voters to actually translate these poll numbers into actual votes, we've yet to see. But it's very interesting, and there's much more to play for than there has been for several years.
Allegiances seem to shift so easily these days. Does that make your job easier as a pollster or harder, or does it not make any odds?
Oh, I think it's definitely harder. It's easy to predict if no one changes their mind. So yes, we've seen a lot of changes, and we try and measure it on the polling side by asking people how they voted before, how they're going to vote now, and get an idea of the swings, which is what it's all about. But it is a very dynamic environment and very strange to have Labour, Reform, and the Conservatives all nearly equal pegging. It's a very strange situation in British politics, and we haven't really seen anything like that since 100 years ago when the new Labour Party overtook the old Liberal Party. And we don't know if something like that's going to happen at the moment, but it's certainly, there's more options for change and evolution than there have been in a long time.
Well, what do you think are the attitudes of young people, particularly the under-25s, about voting and the democratic process? What have you picked up in your findings?
So generally, younger people are less inclined to vote. The older people are more conscientious. That's the right word on voting. Younger people less so. Younger people also tend to go more towards left of centre parties, so Labour and the Greens. But each election is different, so we'll wait to see what happens here. But of course, at local elections, turnout is notoriously low, so that although many people may intend to vote, they don't always all manage to do it. So with local elections, the most motivated voters will have quite a big say. That if you want people to listen to your opinion in the local council, then do get out and vote on Thursday.
Okay. As a pollster, you not only carry out polls, but gather the data from other places. And what is the process thereafter in blending in trends and analysis to bring about your results? How do you do that?
Well, we try and take as much information as we can. So as you say, we do what's called fieldwork in polling, where actual real people get interviewed, usually online these days, and asked what they think about various questions and how they're planning to vote. But then we also work out the correlations, the relationship between how people say they're going to vote and other characteristics like their age and their education and gender and how they voted before. And we also find that it can help quite a lot to add characteristics of the neighbourhood. What are the house prices like in the neighbourhood? What are the levels of deprivation that can affect the votes in some places? And how people's neighbours vote, that people can be quite influenced by, what the neighbours are talking about and how they're planning to vote. That there's the Liberal Democrats particularly good at using that. They have a slogan, Lib Dems winning here, by which they try and convince people that their neighbours are voting Lib Dem, so it makes sense for them to vote Lib Dem. And that's kind of how Lib Dem voting works. It's sort of it forms clusters rather than being spread evenly across the country. So when we're running our predictions, we try and allow for things like that. And the last election, we did fairly well on the Liberal Democrats, Reform and the Greens in predicting where they would have their hot spots and which areas would be quieter for them.
Do you think the modern voter has learned to become more tactical? We certainly have anecdotal evidence of tactical voting against the Conservatives' Reform and possibly to a lesser extent Labour in this election in Kent this time round. What's the tactical voting trend?
Well, I'd say two things on that, Simon. Firstly, I think voters are cross is the first ovation that they have, that they've been cross with the Conservatives and now they're getting cross with Labour. And the crossness is forcing them to think about voting for other options like Reform on the right of centre and the Liberal Democrats and Green on the left of centre.
Would you say that a tactical vote is not the same as a protest vote and a protest vote is not the same as a tactical vote? Or is it the same thing?
I'm not sure. I'm not saying that the cross votes are protests. They're just that there's a lot of anger and disillusionment around, and that's the first thing to start with. Within that, then people, yes, can be tactical. The general election, we saw a lot of anti-conservative tactical voting. I'm sure on the ground there will be tactical voting, but people who are voting for, say, the Green Party are often not thinking tactically because in many seats the Green Party aren't going to win. And of course, at the general election, lots of people were voting Reform, even though that might let Labour in to a lot of seats. So I'm putting the crossness ahead of the tactical slyness, as it were, at the moment. But both are in the mix, but we will wait and see which one dominates.
I mean, one thing that, we've been picking up in the last few days of the campaign is that a substantial number of candidates have mentioned how many people are undecided, even at this late stage. I mean, that must be a nightmare for you trying to accurately gauge opinion and trends when a lot of people simply don't know what their mind is.
Yes, that was difficult at the general election as well. And we rely on asking people, and it does, sort of method works best when the people know what they're going to do.
Yeah, of course.
But equally, people are genuinely undecided, partly because it is so strange and there have been so much movement in British politics into these unusual situations with the three or four big parties now. So it does leave everybody wondering what's going to happen, including the voters themselves. So we try and allow for people who don't know, but it's, it introduces another cause of uncertainty in predictions.
How much influence does social media play in the way that people react to politics or influenced by politicians?
Now, I don't have numbers on that particularly. I think, again, that's going to be something that probably is different at different age profiles, that younger voters are probably going to be more influenced by that than older voters. But I'm afraid I don't have a hard number on that for you. But I mean, we do see that younger people are getting their news less from traditional news channels like TV news and newspapers. And so that maybe they're listening to podcasts like this.
Yeah.
But there's, the media environment is changing as well as the political environment is changing. So as you say, there's a lot going on.
The big losers in Kent and all around the country are likely to be the Conservatives. Will you be measuring their leader, Kemi Badenoch's chances of survival?
Well, I think that's not a decision up to me or the British public either. It's the Conservative MPs. I think the Conservatives would be crazy to change their leader at this time unless they really want to abolish their party. But if the Conservatives do badly, then there could be voices raised against the leadership. On the other hand, remember, to be fair to the Conservatives, 2021 was a massively high watermark. It's vanishingly unlikely they do anything like as well as they did 4 years ago. So it's obviously going to be worse. It's really, I think the threshold is if the Conservatives can win more seats than Reform, then that's, I guess, good. Yeah. And if Reform, this is over the whole country. If Reform win more seats than the Conservatives, then that's an obvious Reform talking point victory.
Okay. The new electoral calculus general election prediction shows Reform massively out in front with 245 seats, Labour on 177 and the Tories reduced to 94. Can Reform realistically hold on for another 4 years at that kind of level?
Well, that's a great question. And there's no way our numbers and polling can answer that. But all we're saying is if there were an election tomorrow, Reform would probably get the most votes, and that would mean they would probably get the most seats. But of course, there isn't going to be an election tomorrow that Keir Starmer has no desire to call one. So it's a bit moot. Your question, to answer it properly, what can happen over the next 3 years before another general election, 3 or 4 years? Well, anything can happen. We are at this incredibly fluid situation. Reform might hold where they are, they might go up or they might go down. They might turn out to be a sort of short-lived bubble like the SDP were in the mid-80s, because they were ahead in the polls at some time. The future lies ahead, as the saying goes, so we will all have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah, because in those circumstances, based on your figures, if Labour did a deal with the Lib Dems, the Greens, the Scottish SNP, the Northern Irish SDLP, the Northern Irish Alliance Party and the Welsh Plaid Cymru, they still would fall well short of what they would need to form a government. Yet Reform, if they did a deal with the Tories, would have a reasonably comfortable majority.
That's right, if those numbers turned out to be exactly right. But remember, one other feature of the fact that it is so close is very small movements in support can make a big change in the number of seats. So just 1%, I think, can move several dozen seats on or off a party. So, it just needs for a party to do a little bit better or worse than is currently measured in polling, and the result could be very different. So it's, predicting the result in the next election is going to be tricky to get it exactly right, because there's going to be so many seats which are marginal. At the last general election, we had more marginal seats than ever before. And the next, or at least more than anything in the last 73 years. And the next election, we might see even more marginal seats. So there's going to be very close in many places.
Martin, that was fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Martin Baxter, founder of Upholsterer Electoral Calculus, many thanks again for your time today, and hope to speak to you again very soon.
Thanks, Simon.
As I mentioned earlier, as we speak, we don't quite know the final result of the election to Kent County Council, but there could be any number of different permutations of who may end up in charge. Dan, you've been looking at the possibility of a Rainbow Alliance at County Hall. Do you think that would work?
Well, it's technically possible, depending on the result. Whether it will work or not, I don't know. I'm just interested in the effect it will exert on all the parties. So essentially the idea is if Tories take a kicking, Reform don't get enough seats to take control of the council outright or don't want to, every other party in that, Greens, Independents, Lib Dems and Labour, could work together to form a rainbow coalition. They're not unheard of. Yes, Swale Borough Council in Kent has or had a rainbow coalition, but that's been a pretty fractious affair. Essentially, I think it would be interesting to see whether the Labour Party would even join it. Maybe, especially if the Labour Party go down from their handful of members that they have now to even fewer, maybe they would say that they want to just leave all the responsibility to the other opposition parties and stand or to the other parties and stand completely apart from them, so that they can't be, they can be blamed for national government's unpopularity, but at least not at a local level.
But Kent County Council is effectively electing itself to dismantle itself within about the next sort of 3 to 4 years. The feeling I get is that most parties would probably think, well, rather than just play politics with it, they might actually sort of want to play nicely together.
Maybe it depends what happens. The abolition process, I'm certain, is going to take a very, very long time, and we'll end up attempt to please everyone and end up pleasing nobody. And a lot of the local parties are not particularly enthused about it. I remember the sort of slightly hysterical scenes of people outside County Hall protesting as if it was the abolition of democracy itself, that the elections might be delayed for a few months to get along with the procedure of the restructure. But I guess the question is, whoever takes power, especially if it's a Rainbow Coalition, will they spend enough money to cause problems for any future authority? Because obviously all the debts and liabilities and spending commitments of the existing KCC will be taken over by the councils that abolish it.
Yeah, well, the KCC also does have quite a lot of reserves and also does have quite a lot of assets. So it's not a poor authority, it's just underfunded, they would argue. But the one thing I have heard, and both sides seem to be reasonably open to it, is a Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, because the Lib Dems are thought to be probably going to be the bigger of the smaller parties, and if they get as many as people think they might get, then the rump of the Tory administration plus the Lib Dems might be able to work together in the public interest.
If the Lib Dems aren't psychologically damaged enough by their previous experiences in coalition with the Tories, fair enough.
I think it's a slightly different thing at a different time as well, I guess. Nikki, Reform clearly has a very, very long-term plan. Would they really want to be in charge of KCC in their right minds?
That's a difficult question. In their right minds, I don't know. They would probably want to be in charge of something. This would be a good opportunity for them to make a bit of a mark, but how much of a mark, I don't know. They're the ones who are getting the headlines all the moment, and it'll be interesting to see what the voters have done, if they've decided that they want a little bit of a change, want a huge change, and vote for Reform, or it's just better the devil you know. People will usually vote on a party's record, but Reform hasn't been around that long, hasn't really got a record to go on. So it's going to be a leap into the unknown for people who vote for them in that way. And it's going to be really interesting to see by the time this comes out and the results are coming in, as to see where people have put their faith. The question is that if Reform does take charge, are they going to be able to deliver on their election promises, and can they? It's not just on an organisation point of view, it's whether there's actually enough time left for them to make any kind of impact. So, they might go in all guns blazing and, make huge sweeping changes. If it doesn't work out, they can say, we haven't had enough time. There will be an answer for it, whether it's success or not. It's easy to grab people's attention when you've got those hard-hitting national issues. But when it actually gets down to the day-to-day nitty-gritty of, are our kids getting a decent education? Are our potholes being filled? Are our vulnerable elderly being looked after? That day-to-day business is very different from the big headlines that they're getting. And they've got some experienced people within their group, but whether they can all work together and make that happen to run our council.
Could be that they would prefer to be sort of a largish group in opposition, because that way you swerve any responsibility and you can just continue to throw balls from the back. That's what a good opposition would do, particularly since KCC won't be running the full term anyway, and they would like to have a significant proportion of people going into the new arrangements with the unitary authorities in time.
Yeah, even in opposition, that would perhaps give them the opportunity to lay their day-to-day agenda out and to say, OK, well, if we were in charge of one of the unitaries that's going to, come ahead in the future, this is what we would be doing. I don't think that they've been around long enough for us to really know, as I said, the nitty-gritty of what needs running on a day-to-day basis.
Rob, Kent councils are expecting a letter imminently from the local government minister, Jim McMahon, and he'll be setting out what's going to happen next with local government reorganisation. What do you understand so far?
Well, I think basically it's going to come out after the counting has been done, and it's from what I understand, it's going to basically be sort of kind of a roadmap towards the October deadline for putting forward proposals of what the various authorities want to see, the unitary authorities that will play out, that are sort of the spectre hanging over this whole thing, how that will actually play out. I think it'll be, I think KCC, this election, is quite interesting in the sense of a lot of people are talking about what it says about the national picture of politics. If Reform do well, a lot of people will be saying, well, Nigel Farage is on the route to becoming our next Prime Minister. We can debate that some other time probably. But I think what is probably a lot more prescient towards is what those unitary authorities after this reorganisation are going to look like. If Reform do very well, it's a lot more likely that they'll do well in the unitary authorities, however they are eventually drawn out. Alternatively, the way they're drawn out might mean that the Tories, hang on at maybe a bit of gerrymandering, or not deliberate, of course, but it might influence the effect of what will effectively be the more impactful local government structures, which will start to exist from a couple of years from now.
OK, folks, that's your lot this week. Thanks to Rob, Nikki and Dan for their contributions. And don't forget to keep an eye on Kent Online for the latest local election coverage. You can also sign up for our Politics Briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. And don't miss KMTV's Politics Show every Friday at 5 p.m. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.